Welcome to the sample project for adding cursor effects to your Camtasia Studio project. When you reach the end of this tutorial, you should be able to complete the following tasks in Camtasia Studio. Add cursor effects to your entire timeline. Insert a keyframe on the cursor track to show and hide cursor effects during a specific time. Change the properties and effects, and delete a cursor effect keyframe from the timeline. Once you've imported the Camtasia recording to the clip bin, right-click on the camrec and choose Add to Timeline. In the Editing Dimensions dialog window, choose the automatic preset from the drop-down menu with dimensions of 640 by 360 and click OK. By default, cursor effects are no longer burned into the Camtasia recording so that changes can be made to the cursor during editing. Locate and click the Cursor Effects tab. If it's not visible, click the More tab and select Cursor Effects from the list. A new cursor track is now visible on the timeline, and each of these red tick marks represents cursor clicks during the recording. If we look in the Cursor Effects tab, there are a number of different effects possible to change the look of your cursor. Check and uncheck this box to show or hide the cursor in the video, or drag this slider to change the size of the cursor. There are other effects that we'll talk more about here shortly, and of course I encourage you to explore any of these on your own that we don't cover in this tutorial. It's important to know that any changes made at this point to cursor effects will be applied to the entire video on the timeline, from start to finish. If you'd only like to apply an effect during a specific time period in the video, then you'll need to add a keyframe at the beginning and end of this time period. Let's practice this. Just for fun, let's position the playhead around the 35-second mark on the timeline. Click the Add Keyframe button to insert a red keyframe on the cursor track. With the keyframe selected, let's make a few changes to the cursor effects. First, let's increase the cursor size to about 2. Next, click on the drop-down menu next to Highlight Effect and select Highlight. Then choose Rings from the drop-down menu for left-click effect. Now position the playhead just before this keyframe and click play to see what the cursor effects look like. The cursor size is now larger and is highlighted in yellow to help follow it along on the screen. Also, red rings animate on the screen whenever there's a left click of the cursor. These cursor effects will stay in effect for the rest of the video or until we add another keyframe to turn them off or change them to something else. Let's do that now. Position the playhead near the 1 minute 4 second mark on the timeline. Click the Add Keyframe button again to add another red keyframe on the cursor track. With this keyframe selected, we can now change the cursor effects however we want. Either play around with the other effects to see what they look like, or change everything back to the default settings, which is what I'll do for this tutorial. Now if we position the playhead on the timeline and play back the video, you'll see that the changes are made to the cursor when it reaches this new keyframe. To reposition the keyframe on the cursor track, just click and drag it. To delete a keyframe on the cursor track, right-click the keyframe and choose Remove from Timeline. Now it's your turn to play around with the cool cursor effects in Camtasia Studio. If you haven't already, download the zip file and import the camrec file into Camtasia Studio to practice everything covered in this tutorial. Thanks and good luck.